Good evening and welcome to Lawtalk, the show that brings the law, the Constitution, and the events of the day to you. Tonight, myself, James Barrett, and Mark Malachowski are going to bring you three exciting subjects that are in the news today. Mark, what do we got covering tonight?
Well, first we're going to talk about everyone's favorite buddy, because the government's here to help you, is the IRS, okay, and how that was formed. Next, we're going to talk about FARA, the Foreign Agent Registration Act, and AIPAC, and everyone's favorite lobbyist. And then we're going to talk about PG&E and gas explosion.
Yeah, we're talking about the one in 210, but let's start with number one. We got the IRS, everybody's favorite government organization. Okay, what do you got for me tonight,
Okay,
Mark?
well, back in the olden days, in 1909, there was a President Taft, right? And then he left office in 1913, and the IRS was formed in 1913. Now, about that same time, a little after that, they did the Federal Reserve Act, and then in 1908, a little before that, they created the FBI. They're all kind of the same thing.
Wait a minute, Mark, you're mixing up a lot of agencies here. Are you trying to tell me that the operation of the government and the financial structure and the enforcement are all kind of mixed together?
Okay, well, this is how it worked. Taft had a lot of banking expertise.
William Howard Taft.
William Howard Taft. And the Rothschilds and the international bankers who had been working with the United States quite a while. I mean, they loaned money to both sides in the Civil War.
Well, okay, that's amazing.
And so it was the Rothschilds loaned the money to the north, and the Rothschilds' cousins loaned it to the south.
Wait a minute, are there any documents showing that the Rothschilds...
Yeah. There's no doubt about it. And then the thing is that what happened was the Southerners said, well, we're going to have our own currency, our own bank. And the Rothschilds like, well, wait a minute. No, there's only one bank. It's the Rothschild Bank. And so they cut off the funding for the South, and that's why they lost. So this has been going on for a long time, is the Rothschilds, basically, they don't want to lend money to private people because they can go bankrupt. And they loan money to governments because governments can always raise taxes. And the most profitable thing to loan governments for is wars. So there's always, they have to keep wars going because that's the most costly thing.
Wait a minute, you know the wars going back to the Civil War are all very costly, let alone the Revolutionary War, which nearly bankrupted America.
Yeah, well, that was the Rothschilds weren't really in the funding on that because we didn't even have enough money for them to charge the interest. But anyway, so what happened is that Taft was in 1909, and he was very sophisticated about banking. And so they had to get rid of him because they wanted to put the Federal Reserve in. So Taft resisted the Federal Reserve. And if you go back to Thomas Jefferson was amendment. He was saying, we do not want to have a private bank printing the money. It should be printed by Congress, right?
Wait a minute. You're saying back to Thomas Jefferson.
Thomas Jefferson.
He looked at what was happening. And he said, wait a minute, this is all money that's generated in our country that will be the basis for our value.
Our
currency will be based on only...
Congress can print the money. Nobody else.
But nobody else.
Okay, because he saw what happened with other countries.
But wait a minute, when we got the Civil War, the South was printing their own money.
That's why because the South started to have their own bank. And so the Rothschilds cut off their loan money because they're going, I don't want someone with their own bank, because the South, all the Southern banks up to them had been Rothschild banks. Okay.
Well, wait a minute. And then, that's incredible. You know, none of this is ever taught in history.
Well, if you look at it, also, the Rhode Island Marxists, 75% of those Marxist families had black slaves, and only about 2% of white Christian families had slaves. So it was the Marxists who ran the slave trade. The Marxists were the captains of the slave trade ships, and they were also the owners of those ships. Okay, and they made all the money in the slave trade. But they said, oh, it's the white Christians. But that's just not true. And also, only about 10% of the slaves went to the USA. 90% went to South America, right? And about 11 million slaves died on the crossing, right? About 11 million. So about 1 million died going to the US, but about 10 million died going to South America. So the majority of them weren't even coming to the United States. But the Rhode Island Marxists were in charge of that slave. So the 10 million or 11 million that died, let's say 10 million, the Marxists were responsible for it.
Wait a minute, how does all of this have anything to do with the IRS?
Well, because the IRS is the way that the Rothschilds collect the VIG. Once they put the Federal Reserve in, and once they put the Federal Reserve in, they loan money and you get into a debt slave, Then they got a monopoly on the banks, and the monopoly on the banks means they can leverage 10 times. That means they can loan the same dollar 10 times. So instead of getting 8% compounded interest, they're getting 80% compounded interest, which is called usury.
Okay,
and
well, that is usury. But
okay,
wait a minute, hang on. Taft
is,
resisted all this.
Right.
Now, now you know after Taft was Woodrow Wilson.
And then
Woodrow Wilson was a globalist.
But he knew nothing about banking.
But he was a globalist.
But he knew nothing about banking.
And he was a progressive, funny enough.
So they got rid of Taft, and they put Wilson in charge of the Senate Banking Committee, right? And he knew nothing about banking. And then they made him president, and then he's the one who put in the Federal Reserve, and the FBI was formed. Okay, so the IRS was formed to like get tax money to pay off the loans that the Federal Reserve's made to the Americans, right? To pay the VIG at 80% and give that to the Rothschilds. And the FBI was put in there to protect the Federal Reserve.
This is unbelievably complicated. But so let's get down to a simple thing. Okay, first of all, the IRS could not be created, but it was created under a constitutional amendment. Is that correct?
Okay, William Taft was born in Ohio, so it came in when he was there. He was born in Ohio in 1857. Ohio didn't become a state till 1953, right? And so his administration was kind of quasi anyway. And and Ohio ratified it in 1913, but that was 34 years before Ohio even became a state.
Well, wait a minute. But if Ohio's not a state, how are they having anything to do with the ratification of the 16th Amendment, which is actually the whole basis for the IRS has got to be the 16th Amendment. That's always a controversy.
There's never been a Supreme Court case on this.
Okay, now the question is, beyond this, is from what everything I've researched on this subject alone, the amendment that was passed through all the states that were trying to ratify it was different language in every state.
Right.
So how is it possible that the 16th Amendment created the IRS when, in fact, the wording from the original amendment that was supposed to be voted on by all the states for ratification never was the same amendment? Well, how did that even come up?
Because Wilson was on the take, and what happens when you become a debtor, right? Okay, let's say you buy a car and you don't pay your payment. What happens?
They get repossess a car. Of course.
You buy a house. What happens?
Hey, you get evicted.
Okay, what happens if you borrow money as a corporation?
Well, you can go bankrupt.
No, they put people on your corporate board and run your corporation.
Of course they do.
And what if a king borrows money?
Well, then he's got to put people into power like dukes and earls.
Yeah, dukes and earls who work for the bank. And what if you have a republic like us? Then you've got a staff like we've got 36 Israeli citizens who work for the Rothschilds in Congress right now, right? And most of our State Department and FBI is all Israeli citizens who work for the Rothschilds. So
right.
Because we're in debt, we are controlled by international bankers. We're not controlled by who we vote for. It's got nothing to do with the Constitution. We're debt slaves because we're $150 trillion in unfunded liabilities. And to get another loan, we have to make another concession like, okay, you have a monopoly on the banks. Okay, you got a monopoly on the newspapers. And that became a monopoly on the TV and a monopoly on Facebook and Facebook. But these are all monopolies that are granted to the people who hold our debt.
Well, this is really interesting because then the IRS goes out to the public and collects money
so you can pay the VIG. You can pay the VIG. Pay the 80% usury, right? You know, so that's why then they have the FBI to protect the bank. Remember Bonnie and Clyde?
Of course.
They were heroes of their times because up to 1913, people were free. They had state banks, right? And then when these globalists took over the banks, these people started robbing banks. So they were heroes, right?
Yeah, because they were coming down on the man.
Yeah,
effectively coming down.
And who fought Bonnie and Clyde and, you know,
the FBI.
FBI. So the FBI are there to protect the globalist bankers. They have nothing to do with helping Americans at all, and they never have.
Well, that's an interesting story, but what happens when the IRS is used as an attack force against those poor innocent citizens?
Okay, well, what happens when they install a president, for example, like the Clintons and the Bushes, they install those, okay? And if they're not happy with the Clintons and they're not getting their VIG paid and they're not getting more monopolies, then they'll fund the opposite party.
Well, why don't we hold it right there, because this goes into a whole nother category of crime at a governmental level. But Mark, what's our next subject for the night?
Well, the next one is AIPAC, which is the remember I had the Friends of Bill?
Oh, of course.
And so they get the $130 million from Russia,
yeah.
But that wasn't...
Oh, back to Uranium One that we've covered many times.
That wasn't really from Putin. That was from a friend of Bill.
A friend!
And also, if you have an email to your friends, That you work for the State Department, they don't count because it's to your friends.
It's a friend, and those are all private.
And then when Comey gives stuff to his friends at Columbia University,
yeah, the professor.
Doesn't matter if he wrote
Who's
it out.
a secret FBI agent of some sort.
Yeah, he's an ad hoc guy.
Ad hoc.
And then it doesn't matter, if you're talking to the president about national security because it's personal and these are your friends.
Well, wait a minute. National security is personal. It's Mark and Jim. Come on,
so
let's get to
AIPAC
it,
has
man.
the same thing. That says this is the Israeli lobby, right? But they're not registered under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, and they're the only country on the planet who is not. And why not? Because, we're the friends.
We're the friends of Israel. We're all friends.
So it's all friends of Bill, friends of Israel.
They're one of our friends.
Okay, so anyway, in AIPAC...
It's almost like they're a good fellow.
Yeah, they're good fellows. They're friends. And so what AIPAC is a pro-Israel lobby. It's probably the strongest, best organized, and most effective lobby network in Washington, D.C. For the 2015-2016 election cycle, the pro-Israel network had already spent $4 million in change, $4.2 million in contributions. The largest single amount of $260,000 went to guess who?
Wait a minute. I can only guess. Who?
Wait a minute. Well, you got to go like this.
Oh.
To Senator Charles Schumer.
Oh, Big Chuck.
Okay, now, Senator Charles Schumer was the one that said, and he said, well, we've got to give $30 billion to Israel.
Of course we do.
And, of course, he voted on that. He didn't recuse himself and go, well, I got $250,000 from these guys. Maybe I shouldn't vote on
Only a $250,000?
Yeah. Well,
that sounds like you got underpaid.
That's in the white.
Wait a minute. I have a question, though. Wasn't President Trump the first president to go to AIPAC and give a speech?
Everybody's got to go AIPAC.
If you don't go to AIPAC, you're kind of really messing up.
Sometimes the, Hillary's FBI deep state hunting accident.
Oh, hunting accident.
Yeah. So you tend to have an accident.
Or you can come out of Reverend Reich's church, and then, of course, we know who those are.
So that's kind of interesting. Now, another thing that's interesting, I think, a lot, is Univision. Now, Univision is obviously a lobbyist for Mexico. And they're not.
But they're not claimed, and they're not registered.
They're not they're not registered. They're not with FARA.
Oh, of course not.
And so
they're not really they're not doing any lobbying.
No, they're not.
They're not doing any. Oh, by the way.
Yeah, it's like open borders.
Oh, open borders.
Okay, and the reason they've got to have the open borders for both Israel and Mexico is because, the Dapper Dan, or the Brainy Dan, who's an Israeli citizen from Ukraine, he brings the heroin in from Afghanistan, right?
I don't want to. Man, the whole drug thing is.
Okay, then they go.
You're trying to tell me the government is run by drugs.
Well,
Mark.
I'm not saying that. That's not the white money. We just explained the white money. The black money, comes through Europe and then it goes through Mexico and it comes up to the border. That's $80 billion a year, right? And it's also the prostitution of the chicks, the white girls they sell as prostitutes, and then the methamphetamine. Now that is
that comes out of North Korea.
Now that's why they need. Well, that's Romania. It's the big one. So anyway, what happens here? That $80 billion that they make on the drug trade. Okay, you know how much Soros put in these local elections for this midterms?
I have no idea.
$30 billion. Where do you think he got that? He got that off the heroin deal. And so that's why Schumer keeps the border open, because that's their black money. That's their spending money. This $250,000 here and $1 million here, this $4 million, this is just change. So it's like you're driving around in a Jaguar. Where'd you get the money? Well, I got $250,000, right? But they have to have some money.
But wait a minute. You could actually argue the reason they're opposed to the wall is because that'll interfere with the heroin trade.
Oh, of course, because the heroin is one of the biggest government fundraising things the United States has. It's huge. It's $80 billion a year. And not only that, heroin's really good because once you try it, you're addicted, right? And then you can, so these people...
But it's always a friend that gives it to you.
It's always a friend. It's a friend of Bill.
It's a friend of Bill.
Friend of Bill. So that's what's kind of interesting here. And then also you've got, the same, the Rothschilds are in on this thing. And so you've got, like I said, 36 people in Congress, right, who, they all get funding from AIPAC. And Israel launders all the drug money and also cleans up all the money. But for some reason, AIPAC and Israel are completely exempt from FARA. And then also Univision and all the people of the open border for Mexico completely exempt from FARA.
Completely exempt.
And that just
my God, why would that be?
And it just happens to correspond with moving $80 billion of illicit drugs in the United States and giving this enormous cash cow that you don't have to pay taxes on or report.
Well, I got to tell you.
Because they're friends.
Wait a minute, because they may be friends.
They're
but
friends.
You know what? There's been a lot in the news about John Kerry trying to negotiate the Iranian nuke deal even behind President Trump's back. Is he a registered agent with FARA?
Well, there's another act that goes to that one, but that's the Logan Act. But I'm not going to get into Logan Act. That's a whole other show, okay? But every foreign country except Israel represented in Washington by foreign agents registered under the Foreign Registration Act. Okay, a country in question is absolutely banned for participating in American elections. Now, does AIPAC participate in American elections?
I would say yes. That would be a yes, Mark.
Every contact the agents have with Congress, does Univision do this, must be reported to the Department of Justice, along with how and where they spend their resources. Every penny and every contact. Every
Well, that's funny because 99% isn't reported.
Okay, AIPAC represents Israel government, not Americans, despite the thinly veiled ruse that it represents some Israeli citizens who also happen to hold American citizenship because they're dual citizens. They're dual citizen, right? They have a right to, and they actually, not only that, but, well, when you mention the Iran nuke deal, it's kind of interesting because Israel never signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and we don't know about their biological and biochemical. I mean, we have no idea.
Well, they're saving it for Iran.
Yeah, right. And so anyway,
or Syria, as whatever comes up first.
Anybody who violates FARA, right, $10,000 or imprisonment by not more than 5 years, and they also are subject to deportation. So I mean, you know, these guys have AIPAC's got tens of thousands of violations.
Well,
but nobody touches them.
Hang on. But there are special friends.
There are special friends. They're friends of friends.
They're friends of friends.
They're special friends because they brought over.
They're one of ours.
They brought over the black bag.
Hey, here's the black bag.
You know,
and when Chuck opened his door in his garage, he realized, oh, the bag's been here. It's Santa Claus.
Santa Claus.
Santa Claus. That means we must allow the border to stay open.
The border's got to stay open, and
the border must stay open.
And we can't audit the Federal Reserve.
Can't audit the Federal Reserve.
No.
Heaven forbid.
And we can't have Congress print money. We got to have some foreign globalists print the money. And then when Bernie Sanders goes to Bernanke, what did you do with that $2 trillion? He goes, I'm not telling.
I don't have to tell. I'm above the law.
So $2 trillion is like change to these people, right? It's
well,
change.
I gotta tell you something. You know, Mark, I need an interest, one-day interest on that $2 trillion.
Well, I'm saying usury is the oldest trick in the world, and when you can leverage 10 times at 8%, you're charging 80%.
I like this vague argument.
So
I like the Rothschilds and the big argument.
If you were lending money at 8% compounded, and I lend you $1, in 9.2 years, you owe me $2, right? But if I'm doing 80%, that's like 1.2 years. So let's say you got a $1 trillion war. The next year it's 2 trillion, 4 trillion, 8 trillion. That's how we got to be, well, with
a debtor nation.
We're like $150 trillion in debt, and actually, I would argue 240 trillion in debt.
Okay, I think we should leave it out there with that $240 trillion or whatever that magic number is, because Mark, what is our next subject?
Well, the thing is, I have some new ski equipment I wanted to try out, and we'll just see how things work.
Well, I don't know about you, but that looks like you're about ready to hit the slopes.
Okay, yeah.
Oh!
I got some new, yeah, just put it right in there.
One of our studio aides.
One of our studios doing a big job. And we might need it. We might need a little bit more, but we'll try it. So, okay. So anyway, we'll just see how this goes.
What is our third subject, masked man?
This is.
Whoa!
This is. Well, I think we better just do this because we're not going to get the effect we're looking for. Okay, this is kind of like San Mateo when you use the old pipe that you should have thrown away.
Use the PG&E pipes.
The PG&E pipes, yeah.
Does this remind me of September 12th, 2010, when they used pipes that were not welded properly and the whole neighborhood blew up? Is that what happened, Mark?
Okay, 40 people injured, I think 4 people killed. And what was the reason? The reason was, Jim, why don't you start off here?
Well, I will tell you that PG&E, because of their repairs that they did on a regular basis, would use pipes that weren't even cleared or tested to be used.
Don't touch that.
I will not touch that. In fact, this reminds me of a Halloween story, but so does PG&E. What they used were pipes that were not welded properly. They used pipes that could not withstand the pressure, and because of all the building and all the new developments, residential developments, PG&E pumped a higher pressure amount of gas through pipes that weren't even qualified for half the pressure.
Okay, let me go into this just a little more detail. Okay, so let's say you've got a piece of steel like this, right? Imagine this is a piece of steel, and you want to make a pipe out of it, right? What they use is rolled steel. You roll that steel together, right? And now if you're going to use a gas pipe, it's not like a water pipe. You've got to weld the inside of the seam and the outside of the seam. So when you're done, you have a pipe that's been welded on the inside.
And that means it's totally sealed and double strength.
Well, what it means is it can withstand pressure fluctuations too, because it's a matter of tensile strength, because it's going to be expanding and going like this as your pressures vary, right? And you're going to be under high pressure. Now, what happened with PG&E? They bought some defectively manufactured pipe that had been sealed on the outside, welded on the outside, but it wasn't welded on the inside.
And nobody even bothered to look.
No notes. They went out and they used it, and then someone inspected it, goes, well, this is bad pipe, let's get rid of it. Did they destroy it?
No.
Did
they saved it.
They put it in the courtyard on a pile of things, and so they had
pile of pipe.
And then several years later, when they needed some pipe to fix something,
hey,
they said,
pipe?
"Oh, here's some pipe."
Oh, here's some pipe.
But they didn't inspect that, right? And so what they did is they put that flawed pipe in that was not what we call it was a flawed material of construction. And then when the pressure hit it, it couldn't stand it. It blew up. Like I said, it killed, I think, 4 people.
It killed 8 people.
Okay, and then but
you know
injured about 40.
Do you know who one of the people were that it killed?
Who's that?
It killed the woman in charge of overseeing PG&E's high-pressure pipes who lived there. Her name was Craig.
Okay, and so that was her house?
That was her house.
Well, that's...
She was living, and I believe it was her and her daughter died.
Oh, my gosh.
And this is very ironic that the woman that's involved or supervising PG&E's process unfortunately met her demise on this.
Well, I think that it's a terrible thing, even how guilty they are, because
you could put a conspiracy on that,
it's a terrible thing. But the thing is, what the PG&E lawyers claimed, I said, don't touch that thing.
I'm not touching.
Don't be touching those things.
It's touching me, buddy.
Yeah, be careful.
It's alive.
It's starting to move a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe we should put this away.
Okay.
It's starting
to
get
careful there, big guy.
It's starting to get a little crazy.
It is bubbling.
Yeah.
And by the way, it could be September 10th again.
It's starting to get a little crazy. But anyway, the point is what the lawyers said, they used seamless pipe. And that was the story they gave to the press. And of course, the press.
That's not quite what happened.
The press always, doing what they're told.
You mean always listening to what they're told?
Always saying what they're saying.
Reporting what they're told.
Saying what they're told to say instead of saying what really happened. Went ahead and reported the seamless pipe story. And of course, that was nonsense. But what really happened was it was a defective pipe that a routine inspection would have found. It was gross negligence, to say the least. Oh, was it extremely careless? It was extremely careless. Okay, it was extremely careless. It wasn't gross negligence.
It wasn't gross negligence.
It was extremely careless.
It wasn't under federal law that it was gross negligence.
Yeah, so
it was careless.
It was careless. It was extremely careless.
Where have we heard that
so
before?
It doesn't raise.
It doesn't have
no
raise.
Prosecutor would ever prosecute this. Yeah.
It's so funny that there's such a correlation between that.
So anyway,
but wait a minute. Did the PG&E eliminate 30,000 emails?
I think that they just eliminated
every email.
40 people.
Yeah.
But anyway, so this was a total cover-up. It was a total, I would say it was reckless endangerment.
It definitely reckless
endangerment, and I would say that would be manslaughter.
It could be.
I would say
weren't they talking about prosecuting on a criminal level on this?
Yeah, of course they didn't, because they got paid
Of
off.
course, they settled with all. There was 100 cases filed in San Mateo Superior Court.
Right.
And you know what's funny?
It was seamless pipe.
It was a seamless pipe.
It was a seamless pipe.
Here we go, man.
Nobody knows.
Hey,
Nobody knows. It's a mystery.
It's a mystery. It's a mystery.
And
by the way, it was the best pipe they could ever buy.
Yeah, it was the best pipe. It's the best. It's the best pipe that the politician you could buy.
Yeah.
So the best politician you could buy, and newspaper you could buy.
It was only San Bruno.
Yeah. So that's what happened there. And there's all kinds of protocols, and you can look this up in the federal thing because they did the research on it. But that's all long and very complicated, and they kind of buried this one fact in there under the millionth page. But the fact of the matter is, it's supposed to be welded on the inside. This pipe was not
welded.
And if you don't weld it on both the inside and the outside, when you get that high pressure of gas lines,
it's going to explode.
Then you're going to lose it.
Or the potential for explosion is high.
Well, but the problem is that any kind of friction is enough to give the spark. You don't actually need much. You don't need a lighter to start this up.
No, not at all.
Because it's moving through the rocks.
Yeah, of course.
With static electricity, there's plenty of spark because it's highly flammable, combustible.
Well, you realize that PG&E was fined $244 million. As a result.
Is that why my bill went up?
Yeah, my bill went up because they were paying off. And by the way, they were told they couldn't raise the bill.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, they were told that one.
Yeah, told that
you
one.
Can't raise the bill on every client to pay for this fine.
Yeah, right.
And they said, of
course not. No,
of course we won't raise the bill. Magically, your bill's gone up about 50%.
Yeah, well, that's a seamless bill.
Oh, that's a seamless bill.
It just seems like it.
It's a turnkey operation.
It just seems like your bill went up.
It just seems. Oh, by the way, it's your imagination.
Yeah, it's a
Look this way.
Yeah, look at this way.
There's nothing to see here.
So PG&E is, of course, kind of like a government monopoly in a way. And even though I think most of the time they do a pretty good job, this was really, really bad. And I think it shows that, you know, they kind of need more inspectors, you know, internally to watch this kind of things. And
Well, wait a minute. You're saying within PG&E?
within PG&E, yeah.
Okay, because
they probably have to fund their internal inspector group.
Well, wasn't there something that wasn't exactly like this? The hexachloride in the Central Valley. Isn't this PG&E again with their pumps and the what's her name?
The girl who she got busted in Lake Havasu, didn't she?
Yeah,
Or
right.
for the drunk boating or something.
Right, drunk boating.
But anyway,
But
yeah.
isn't it the same kind of idea though, where they just try to bury everything? They get rid of the documents. They get rid of all the evidence is trying to be destroyed. I mean, they do it. It's so interesting.
Bleach bit?
What?
Bleach bit? Yeah.
Bleach bit. Bleach.
Wait a minute. Can I, wait a minute, Jim, hold on a second. Can I take a look at your phone here?
Oh, by the way,
yeah.
Here, wait a minute, Wait a minute, I got to give it to Comey tomorrow. Here's my phone.
Yeah,
Let's
right.
here you go. There you go.
Yeah.
Hey, oh, by the way, I got to make sure it's ready to be turned over to the FBI.
Right.
Oh, the FBI tomorrow.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, by the way, FBI.
I'll hammer in the
With
morning.
Lois Lerner. Now let's go, Lois Lerner, IRS,
Yeah.
FBI, and there's my hammer.
Yeah. I'll hammer in the morning.
I'll hammer in the evening.
Yeah, hammer
I'll
all
hammer
day,
all night long.
Hammer all the day long. So yeah, I would say that when you're a quasi-government entity like these, you know, what happens is the press is supposed to watch this, but the press is so corrupt it's actually a complete joke.
Well, I got to tell you, Mark, I think tonight we're going to kind of call it, but I'm going to tell you something.
Hammer in the morning.
Hey, we're going to hammer in the morning.
Hammer in the evening. Hammer
and
all
we're
the
gonna hammer all
livelong
day
day.
long. And then that's not enough. We'll call out the bleach bit.
Yeah, right.
So I want to thank everyone for joining us. And the next time you'll see us, we'll still be hammering.
We'll be
because
hammering.
we're looking for the analysis of why that cell phone was hammered.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so there you go.
Anyway, Mark,
So
I
we
really
kinda
thank you
calmed
tonight.
down
And
there.
That was pretty amazing.
They kind of calmed down.
It actually
Well,
very calm.
it equalized.